Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. Here it is, the Monday edition of Point of View, and we're going to spend some time talking about the pandemic, and then a little bit later we'll get into some other issues in the news. Some of you might say, well, where are we in terms of the election? Safe Harbor is tomorrow. You might say, what in the world is that? Well, that's when all the states have to have certified the election. That is going on pretty significantly. Although a little bit later I'll mention that there is a very long list of examples of voter fraud, which certainly need to be addressed in the future. The vote on the Electoral College will take place next Monday. That will be the 14th. And then, of course, it needs to then be submitted to the vice president, who would be Mike Pence. And as some people have been writing about, Mike Pence will certify the defeat of Donald Trump, most likely, unless something changes, and that is always a possibility. This is the year 2020. I never discount any of that, but I do want to spend some time really focusing on the pandemic. We mention it from time to time, but it's worth mentioning that we have 1 million new cases in 5 days. That goes from Wednesday to Saturday. Of course, now it's Monday. We'll have probably 1 million plus after that. We have, in some locations, a record number of individuals in the hospital. So what has happened? We will certainly spend some time a little bit later when we talk to the entire audience, the national audience, talk about this. But right now, what you have in California, for our listeners in California, 33 million Californians under a new regional stay-at-home order that began last night. And so we will spend some time talking about that. The Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti said, if you're able to stay home, stay home. Well, I appreciate the advice, but it also brings us back to one of the reasons why I think we've had some difficulty even implementing these orders. One, because some of them are anti-Christian, if you will, anti-religious services might be a better way to say that. Some of them are a little bit bizarre, but I think the biggest issue is that we have just too many people breaking their own rules. And it's not just something that we've talked about or that various talk show hosts, whether it's Tucker Carlson or Rush Limbaugh or others talking about. I have in front of me here one from Brianna Keller, who is a host at CNN, who actually came down on such Democratic leaders. I mean, in fact, she focused almost exclusively on Democrats. California Governor Gavin Newsom, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, San Francisco Mayor London Breed, Denver Mayor Michael Hancock, and others. And after listing each one of the offenses of each one of these political leaders, she reminded the audience that, trust is built slowly, but it evaporates faster than reservations at a fancy restaurant. And then, as she said, these are people that have spent a fair amount of time criticizing Republicans because sometimes they aren't wearing masks. But she then says maybe they need to just go and look in a mirror, because a lot of individuals who are actually watching these individuals have the classic illustration of do as I say, not as I do, have a little bit of difficulty, and there are a number of things being posted today about backlash. Part of it is because people are coronavirus fatigued. Some of them are seeing the irrationality of some of these mandates. But I think there's another part of it, and that is, if I really was to be convinced that this would be serious, I think I would notice a difference in your behavior, and I don't. And, for example, you had Gavin Newsom and London Breed who were talking about the fact that we should wear masks. we should maintain social distance. Then we see the governor of the state of California and the mayor of San Francisco over there at that very exclusive, the French Laundry in Napa, California, shoveling down very expensive food. Nobody's wearing a mask. They're elbow to elbow with one another. Yeah, it's just hard to take that terribly seriously. Or, since we're in the state of Texas, the mayor of Austin, Texas, who sent a message that we should stay home in order to keep the numbers down, and he sent that message while he was in Cabo, Mexico. And of course, you have two individuals that are really in the target demographic. That would be Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, and Senator Dianne Feinstein. Both of them are over the age of 80, and they are certainly individuals that should wear a mask and certainly should be very careful. Of course, we've seen pictures with both of them without mask and circulating among people and, in a sense, breaking the very rules that they tell us that we should follow. That doesn't justify it, and I'm certainly not saying that. You know, if nothing else, I taught my kids that just because they break the rules down the street doesn't mean we break the rules in this household. But I think it also explains perhaps a little bit why some people are not taking some of these mandates as seriously as they should. There's another real concern. We are really close to distributing these vaccines. Now, the one that we were hoping was going to be so effective by Pfizer, they've had to cut back a little bit in the number of distributions, points, and amounts. But nevertheless, I think we're going to very quickly be able to vaccinate a number of people. With that, now the Pew Research Center has actually, and this is one of the articles we've posted for you to read, points out that there's a demographic, identifiable demographic, that has made it very clear they probably will not take the vaccines, and that will be our African American friends. Just 32% of black adults said that they would definitely or probably get the vaccine for the coronavirus. That's compared with 52% of white adults, 56% of Hispanics, and 72% of Asian Americans. Why am I not surprised? I know my Asian friends always wear a mask and probably the first ones to go out there and get a vaccine. And so what has been suggested, at least by the Chicago mayor, Lori Lightfoot, you know, the one that also violated her own rules. Anyway, we'll go back to that in just a minute. She was on just the other day on MSNBC, and she said, I'm well aware of, unfortunately, the sad history of experimentation on African Americans and people of color, which is the legacy we're still dealing with now, and it's manifesting itself into reluctance on the part of some to think about the vaccine. Now, I would like to believe that the individuals that are saying they're not going to get a vaccine at least know enough history that at least they know something about the, for example, Tuskegee experiments that took place, which is one of the saddest chapters in American history, for sure. The experimentation on mostly African-American males from the 1930s to all the way up to the early 1970s. I did not know that it lasted that long. So that is the case. And so there's been a real push in the black community to try to get some individuals to speak out, and probably one that I want to give credit to is a man by the name of Ernest Grant, African American, but also the president of the American Nurses Association, hoping that he might be able to get other pastors in the black churches and others to actually step forward. Because he's actually said the trial is double-blinded, meaning researchers and participants don't know who's actually getting the real vaccine or the placebo. And so he says, I'm very confident that the vaccine is safe, and I want to encourage individuals, I think he's primarily talking about in the African-American community, to consider getting that vaccine. Again, it's a different kind of vaccine. I know some people are saying, I'm never going to get a vaccine because I don't want to put that virus in my body. Well, no, this is different than any kind of vaccine we've ever seen before, because what it is actually mRNA stimulating your body to produce antibodies as if you were infected, but actually you've never actually had the coronavirus in your system. It's a very safe vaccine, I think, in light of what we know, but still can't get people to take it. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Recent studies of media bias in the last election are a reminder that we need to have discernment when we read, hear, and watch the news and visit websites. A number of studies for the last 2 years confirm that a majority of Americans are concerned about fake news. Today and tomorrow, I want to discuss 2 studies of media bias and their impact on the 2020 election. It isn't much of a surprise that a recent study has now concluded that Google bias may have shifted at least 6 million votes to Democrat Joe Biden. The surprise in the study is that it came from Dr. Robert Epstein, who is a Harvard-trained Democrat. The researchers collected 500,000 election-related searches and concluded that conservatives got slightly more bias in their search results than liberals did. He wondered how you could account for that and then found what he called a smoking gun. He found a period of days when the vote reminder on Google's homepage was being sent only to liberals. Not one of our conservative field agents received a vote reminder during those days. When Epstein went public with his findings, Google apparently shut off that manipulation that night. For the next 4 days before the election, they were showing vote reminders to everyone. Epstein and his team concluded that the manipulations they discovered so far could easily have shifted at least 6 million votes in just one direction. That is the bare minimum. To calculate the maximum, they still have much more data to examine. He also made it clear on more than one occasion that he is not a Trump supporter. He is a supporter of democracy. He may have wanted Biden to win, but he wanted this election to be fair. Yes, we all want elections to be fair, and so I commend him for his research. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, there may be another reason why we certainly have a number of individuals that don't want to take the vaccine and maybe aren't following all of the kind of prescriptions being set forth, and that is the fact that maybe the press did a very poor job of covering the pandemic. Now, I want to give some grace wherever I can and recognize we've never had anything like this in the modern world, but there is a new research study that just came out, and it's done by professors at Dartmouth College and Brown University, and it's a paper in the National Bureau of Economic Research in which they make, I think, a very convincing case that the media, especially in the United States, because I'm going to do a comparison to how much better in some of this it was covered in other countries, that the media in the United States went too far, created a climate of fear and even panic. And it's written by John Fund, who's been on the program with us before. I would have probably posted this one today, but it came out after I'd already posted the articles. And so either I'll post it tomorrow, or maybe I'll just do a commentary on it, because he starts out by reminding us that during the 1930s, actually 1933 in particular, Franklin Delano Roosevelt comes on the radio and reminds us that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, namelessly unreasoning, unjustified terror. And yet these scholars at Dartmouth and also at Brown University began to analyze the tone of these various stories about the coronavirus since January, and they found a striking difference in the way the elite U.S. media covered the pandemic compared to other countries. Now, I have a theory, which I think as we read through this, you'll probably agree with, but let's just give them a chance to say what they found. They found that 91% of the stories by U.S. major media outlets were negative in tone, compared to about only 54% in non-U.S. major sources, or about 65% for scientific journals. So the bottom line is that more than 9 out of every 10 stories were fearful, almost panic-ridden, and yet when you looked at other news sources, other parts of the country, it was about 50-50, just slightly more. Even in the scientific journals, it was about a little less than 2/3. So you have nothing like the incredible amount of fear and panic that was being used in these COVID-19 stories in America, especially among the so-called elite or mainstream media. Let me again quote from them. They said stories of increasing COVID-19 cases outnumber stories of decreasing cases by a factor of 5.5, even during the period when new cases were declining. So even as the cases were dropping, as they were in a number of occasions, you wouldn't know that by reading the press. Now you might say, why is that? I think I have an answer. Donald Trump. Because what they found is that stories discussing President Donald Trump and hydroxychloroquine were more numerous than all the stories combined that cover companies and individual researchers working on the vaccines. Now, again, if you want to blame Donald Trump, and everybody seems to want to that day, you said, well, he shouldn't have been talking about hydroxychloroquine, but even when he didn't talk about it, there were story after story after story after story after story that just kept coming out. And so as a result, part of it was we're going to spend more time saying that the president is being irresponsible. And then, as we get into the research study a little bit more, they found that the mainstream press hardly ever covered that vaccines were being produced. Again, if I can slightly pat ourselves on the back here, we told you the moment some of those vaccines were being developed, we told you where they were being developed, and we told you that we were hoping that some of those would be ready by 2020 or early 2021. You would know that by reading a lot of these press reports that have actually been put together in this article in the National Bureau of Economic Research, because they were too busy wanting to use that to bash the current president of the United States. Here's one of the disconnects that they found as well. They also found that the U.S. media almost always were negative when reporting on the idea of reopening the schools. And again, think about this. Who talked about reopening the schools? That'd be President Donald Trump. That'd be the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. And again, the press had such a bias against him that, again, these articles say, quote this, the reporting is overwhelmingly negative, while the scientific literature tells a more optimistic story. They quote from one research project that collects data on school openings and COVID-19 infections within the schools, and they found that the infection rates among students were very low, 0.14%. I'd say most people say that's pretty low. The schools, she concluded, have not become super spreaders. Another research story comes to similar conclusions. And again, almost 90% of all the articles about school reopenings by the mainstream media were negative. And yet in other countries, it was, again, about 50-50. So you can see there is almost a 90% to 50% difference between the way our mainstream press in the United States covered these stories and the way they were covered in other countries. And again, I have to tell you, I wonder if some of that has to do with, Orange Man Bad, Donald Trump. One more. They also found an amazing, this is their quote again, inability of the press and the media to report accurately on the development of the vaccine. I got enough time. Let me read this real quickly. They pointed out that on February 18th, the Oxford Mail published a story about Sarah Gilbert. We talked about this on the program, and the colleagues working on a vaccine for a novel coronavirus. That rapid vaccine development could possibly have given the scientists existing work and experience in the MERS vaccine that they'd done before. But in contrast to this story, that was in Oxford and, of course, in the UK, the U.S. media outlets of Fox News, CNN, the New York Times, Washington Post did not begin coverage of that vaccine work until late April. I'd have to go look back and see when's the first time I began to talk about the work that was being done for AstraZeneca, Oxford, Moderna, and Pfizer, but I'm pretty sure that was way before April. Nevertheless, U.S.-based stories emphasize caveats from health officials, downplay the optimistic timeline. Ultimately, I'm reading into this now, didn't even talk about the fact that there was Operation Warp Speed. They don't say that, but I think that's kind of what you can conclude. And they finally found that the earliest available story about these vaccines was on CNN on April 23rd. So again, they point out that instead the announcement of not one but two promising vaccines didn't happen until, they said, almost 6 months later. I can remember when I got on this air and talked about the three different vaccines and explained what they were and what they were using to develop. And if nothing else, it's just a good example, again, of what we call kind of media bias. And that media bias, in large part, I think, can only be explained by the fact that we just do not want to have one possible story that could be positive about Donald Trump. And so we're not going to cover these stories about the vaccine. We're not going to cover the stories about the possibility that we could reopen the schools. And we're going to, whenever we talk about the vaccine, talk about it in the scariest possible ways in order for people to be, in some respects, quite terrorized. Just before we take a break, matter of fact, since we're getting close to a break, I'll pick this up after the break, and then we'll get into some other topics, because this one is sort of related to the pandemic, but a little bit different. And that has to do with the fact that the latest Gallup poll now shows that the mental health ratings for Americans have actually sunk to a new low. Oh, I wonder why that is. Oh, maybe it has to do with the lockdown, the pandemic, the negative coverage, and all the rest. You can look at the charts, and we have never seen them this low. When you look at those who say excellent, it's dropped very low. Those who say fair, poor. So we'll look at that. It is interesting. The physical health ratings are about the same, which is a bit of a surprise given the fact that maybe some people are couch potatoes during the lockdowns, but I think others probably are using it to exercise or to eat carefully. So anyway, we'll see that. But also, when we come back from the break, I want to talk about that even though the mental health ratings are dropping for almost every demographic, there was one demographic where they actually improved significantly. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. By the way, if you'd like to join our conversation, we have a lot more to cover, and we're going to move away from the pandemic in just a few minutes. Talk about what it's going to look like next year with a most likely Joe Biden presidency. What about this Senate? You know, we got two Senate races. We had a debate last night. We'll get into that. The whole article that I've posted here by Andrew McCarthy on the war on the Electoral College. And we'll get into a couple other important issues. But we need to take a break, so we'll be back right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Going to get into some other issues in just a minute, but I was talking about the vaccines, and I was thinking maybe I can figure out the first time we started talking about the vaccines. And I actually have found one of these articles we posted by our good friend Dr. Merrill Matthews on that. Then I found one in which I summarized all three, Moderna, Pfizer, and also AstraZeneca. But the first time we talked about the vaccine and how it would be really important for the major pharmaceutical companies to be freed up from regulations to produce those. That first announcement, actually, again, I'll give credit to Dr. Merrill Matthews, at least because his article's posted, January 28th, 2020. January 28th. That's kind of early compared to a couple of the others, because what we were trying to make the case for at the time is that it takes usually years in order to produce a vaccine. And so if we're going to actually have anything successful, it's going to have to be one where there is going to be a streamlining of FDA approval. And of course, then you can find, a matter of fact, I did a complete summary of one in June, but I can't find some of the earlier ones because a lot of those were things I said on the air before I wrote some commentaries. But anyway, not saying necessarily we did the right thing all the time or that the mainstream press was always unjustified in being negative, but compared to the way the press in this country covered the pandemic, compared to how other media outlets in other countries did, it is pretty obvious that because there was a dislike of the president and of the coronavirus task force, anytime something negative could be published, it was, and anytime there was something positive, even when there was a decline in the number of cases, it either just wasn't covered or they would bring out some case that they found in one other state where it was going up. And so we weren't getting the kind of press coverage I think we deserve. I know that surprises you. I'm sure it doesn't. Let's get to a couple of other issues and we'll move on. One of the other pieces that I thought was very striking is the Gallup poll that just came out. Americans' mental health ratings sink to a new low. Americans' latest assessment, it says, of their mental health. And this is a self-assessment, so we recognize it isn't like a doctor providing it, but it still gives you some idea. But the assessment that we make of ourselves is worse than it's been at any point, at least in the last 2 decades. And given the fact that people tend to not always report accurately some of their negatives, the numbers could be even lower than they are. But they find that 76% rate their mental health positively compared to where it was like 85% actually earlier in the year. So you can see that drop. When you look at those that represent it as excellent from 43% to 34%, you can see a drop. It's a precipitous drop in every single case. And the only time where I see that our mental health was very high was in 2004. Not exactly sure what that was all about, but nevertheless, that's the case. But every year since 2001, Gallup has asked Americans, as part of its November Health and Health Care survey, to actually say whether their own mental or emotional well-being is excellent, good, only fair, or poor. The reading has dropped rather dramatically, and as I look at this graph, you see nothing else like it in the last 2 decades. Probably, if we go as far back as the 1960s, probably don't see anything like it. So that's the impact most likely of the pandemic on individuals, and also secondarily, I would think that it's also a very striking illustration of the impact of the lockdowns, which we'll get to in just a minute. Being a little bit of a numbers nerd, as some of my friends are also calling themselves, I dug into the survey a little bit more, and there was something that they don't really talk about very much that I would put at the top of the list, because they break it down on the basis of, what's been the change in the last year, male, female, Republican, Independent, Democrat. Probably the more dramatic drop was in the Republican mindset in terms of mental health. Whether that's affected by the election or not, I do not know. Then they look at all sorts of other things, race, marital status, age group, income group. All of them are negative. except one. One that not only is not negative, but increased by 4 points, those people who attend religious services weekly. In other words, going to church actually has increased people's perception of their mental health significantly. By the way, those who only occasionally go, it's dropped just as much. But those that try to make their way to religious services, and they don't break it out, although I could dig deeper into that and see whether it breaks it down to synagogue or mosque or churches. But basically, I think given the fact that the disproportionate number of people who say that they weekly attend religious services tend to be Christians going to church, every single other category, gender, party affiliation, race, marital status, age group, household income, whatever, they all dropped. One went up, going to church. If that's not a good argument for not neglecting the assembling together of one another, I don't know what is, because those are the individuals that seem to be more optimistic than they were a year ago about their own mental health. By the way, just real quickly, I won't spend any more time on this, but the physical health seems to be about the same. Again, this is self-reporting physical health, has not changed dramatically. And again, it dipped slightly, and I think that dip, but it's not huge, is due to those individuals who, because of the lockdown, didn't exercise, ate too much. As the old joke goes, one of the advantages of wearing a mask is not just to prevent getting the coronavirus, but to keep you from eating. So, again, that's an issue that we've seen as well. Just before we take a break, let me talk about one other impact, and that has been, as we mentioned just the other day, and it's, I think, the fourth article on our website here, the fact that online learning has tanked grades. Learning, for example, this is just using Virginia as one example, largest school system has been devastating. Of course, just the other day I quoted from Deborah Saunders, who was actually looking at all sorts of studies across the country, and this is just one more illustration of what we found. Mary Margaret Olahan, writing for the Daily Caller, said virtual learning due to the coronavirus pandemic is tanking academic achievement in the largest school system in Virginia. This is a study from Fairfax County Public Schools. By the way, that's the bedroom community, if you will, of the capital. And I've lived in Fairfax, Virginia, and know exactly where that county is. But nevertheless, they went on to say, results indicate a widening gap between students who were previously performing satisfactorily and those performing unsatisfactorily. Students who perform well previously primarily perform slightly better than expected during quarter one of the year. But in contrast, students who were previously not performing very well perform considerably less well. So, as I've said before, the good students always are going to do well. The self-motivated students are always going to be motivated enough to probably do their homework. But the percentage of Fs given in middle school and to high school students jumped to 11% from 6%. I've seen others where it says the number of Fs being given out has doubled because of online studies. And again, it isn't necessarily the best and the brightest. They're going to do well no matter what situation you probably put them in. They're probably self-motivated, or they have parents that motivate them. They're going to do pretty well, and online learning probably isn't going to affect them as much. By contrast, the kids who aren't motivated very well, the kids that are dealing with all sorts of learning differences, ADHD, they're dealing with dyslexia, dealing with all sorts of individual issues, or that just come from difficult homes where mom and dad are not there making sure they get online and they do their homework. That study has found, especially in this case, that middle schoolers had a 300% increase in Fs, and the high schoolers had about another 50% increase in Fs. And again, shows, if nothing else, the biggest concern is the younger you are, probably the less academic discipline you have, and the more negatively you are affected by this as well. And then let's talk about one other demographic group before we take a break. For students learning English, these are those who have immigrated here, the percentage of Fs rose by 106%. actually accounting for 35% of all their grades. Because if they are not in an environment where they're learning English, where the parents or the teachers or others are helping them understand some words that they don't have as part of their vocabulary, they don't understand English, they don't understand grammar, they're the ones that are getting hurt as well. So these lockdowns have had negative impacts in terms of drug abuse, suicide, loneliness, depression, but the greatest impact now is starting to show up in the school system. And again, I don't think we were well served by the mainstream press that seemed to ignore a lot of that. And yet, that's why we're talking about it today here on Point of View. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me kind of give you an overview of what's going to happen over the next couple of hours. Just a few minutes, we'll have James Taylor with us, and he is the president of the Heartland Institute, and also points out, again, some of the possible dangers of, indeed, what happens if Democrats actually win both of those U.S. Senate races in Georgia, because Senator Whitehouse, that'd be Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island, says that he actually wants to criminally prosecute what are oftentimes called climate realists. And so that is something we'll talk about just in terms of the whole issue of climate change and what might happen if indeed you have a controlled Democratic House, Senate, and Oval Office. So we'll get into that conversation for a little bit and then get into some other issues in the news. And then we will spend some time at the 2 o'clock hour with Pastor Tom Nelson. And we have talked in the past about his GAP program. We have information about that. And also, I'm sure he'll have some other comments about what is going on in America. Most importantly, as an individual who is a pastor who also came down with COVID-19, thought maybe he'd give us some thoughts about all of that issue as well. But one of the other articles I've posted, I called it Delay Nominees, and it comes from Senator John Barrasso, who is from Wyoming, and he's the chairman of the Senate Republican Conference. And what he is pointing out is that, and it's an illustration I've used before, sometimes, mostly Democrats, but sometimes even Republicans, implement a policy. They change a policy. They change some of the norms and rules and regulations, never thinking down the road whether what happens when the party of the opposition is in the same position and now can use those same changes in norms. For example, the Senate got rid of the filibuster. And so they actually got rid of it when Democrats were in control of the Senate. And guess how useful that began to be for, of course, the Republican-controlled Senate. Barack Obama loved to write executive orders, and then all of a sudden, Donald Trump is in office, and he's writing all sorts of executive orders. Just because one did it doesn't necessarily make it right, but it certainly doesn't prevent the other side from using it. And he's making a real case about the fact that for the last 4 years, Senate Democrats have done all they could to delay the nominees for President Donald Trump. And he says Republicans won't forget. He takes us back 4 years ago when, after Donald Trump surprisingly won, there were all sorts of activists that actually camped out in front of Chuck Schumer's apartment building and used bullhorns and everything, jeering the Senate Minority Leader, telling him to show some spine, to resist all that Donald Trump is trying to do by any means necessary. And as John Barrasso points out, nearly every Democrat senator eventually complied. The result, he says, was unprecedented. As had been the tradition, Presidents Clinton and Obama had nearly all of their cabinet confirmed in January. Clinton had 13 out of 14. Obama had 11 out of 15. But Senate Democrats made sure that Donald Trump had 3. Just again, let's go back to that. During the entire month of January, 3 confirmed for Donald Trump, when you were getting 13 for Clinton, 11 for Obama. And it would have been more for Obama, but I think a couple of his picks were somewhat controversial and did have to be considered for quite some time. Senator Barrasso points out that because the Democrats abolished the filibuster for confirmation votes in 2013, Democrats couldn't block any appointment without Republican support. But that's why then the Democrats started facing the various nominees with questions for the record kinds of questions. Democrats voted in bloc against nominees in committee. They consistently refused to consent to routine floor votes. They forced the use of the cloture procedure, then made sure to use up every minute of the 30 hours, because once you said, well, we at least have 30 hours for questioning, they would spend 30 hours for every one of those confirmation votes. Then the Senate Democrats, he points out, slowed down and attempted to block the confirmation of 24 of Donald Trump's cabinet and cabinet-ranked nominees. None faced similar roadblocks in the first term of Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, or Barack Obama. Then when lower-level nominees were included, then the number goes up, the percentage goes up dramatically. Democrats attempted to block 79 executive branch appointments in the first 2 years of Donald Trump's administration. His 6 predecessors combined faced the same obstruction only 18 times in their first 2 years, and that's all of the predecessors, not just any one president. And so the point he makes is simply this. Joe Biden has begun to name the men and women he wants to serve in key positions. The U.S. Senate will have something to say about every one of them. And he says, don't expect Senate Republicans to forget how Democrats treated Donald Trump's nominees. Don't expect the tens of millions of Americans who voted for Mr. Trump in 2016 and 2020 to forget it either. He says now if Republicans hold the majority in the Senate next year, and that'll be something we'll be talking about in just a minute with James Taylor, we will have the ability to reject Mr. Biden's nominees. But unlike the Democrats, he says, we'll use that power responsibly. A Republican Senate will treat mainstream nominees fairly. But as soon as we start hearing people complain about Republicans not pushing through some of the nominees, I think it will be important to remind people what it was like 4 years ago when, after the month of January was done, Donald Trump had 3 individuals in his cabinet. You know, it's kind of hard to do government when you can't even have your people in place to move ahead. And of course, we know that some of the others that should have been removed actually spent time spying on him. So anyway, Senator Barrasso says the unprecedented obstruction of the previous administration will have lasting consequences for future administrations. Senate Democrats put in place new standards and new norms, and they won't easily be washed away. Now, again, he's not saying that we will treat them exactly the same way. And I sometimes try to take some of these ethical principles and put them into things that we can all understand if we have been parents. And that is, as I said before, just because the kids down the street did it doesn't mean that you're going to let your kids do it. So again, I recognize that just because Democrats worked so hard to actually have the resistance preventing individuals from actually holding cabinet positions and even having various individuals in the federal judiciary doesn't mean that Republicans should do that. But there's another principle that we think about as well that we teach our kids, and that is if you keep rewarding bad behavior, you get more bad behavior. And so in some respects, I think it would be really wise, especially when a nominee is questionable, and there are a few that have shown allegiance, it looks like, to communist governments and Marxist ideologies, they should be held up. And the argument would be very clear that look at the very qualified nominees that you held up 4 years ago. We're certainly going to take our time looking at some of these, and we may actually vote them down. And maybe that would send a message to the other side of the aisle. Maybe it wouldn't. But this piece by Senator John Barrasso was one I thought I'd bring up because it was just a great reminder of what the Trump administration faced for the first 2 years of its administration. I hope and pray that the Democrats maybe learn a lesson if Republicans hold back a nominee here or there. But if they want to start crying and complaining and finger pointing, what we need to do is say, this is how you treated so many qualified nominees 4 years ago. Why shouldn't we at least hold back some of these that, because of some of their allegiance and some of the things they've said before, maybe would be better if they weren't in your administration. Anyway, we're going to take a break. When we come back, going to talk about the hope that at least a few individuals have that we might actually be able to prosecute people that don't believe that global warming is an existential threat. We'll be right back.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Monday edition of Point of View, and this hour we're going to spend a little bit of time, first of all, talking about this idea of climate change and really what's at stake when we are talking about these two Senate races in Georgia and what could happen if indeed Democrats control both the House, the Senate, and the Oval Office in terms of just even the issue of climate change. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. If you're not familiar with that, we have this booklet that I've made available that I put together on a biblical view on climate change, also a more recent one on energy and the environment, and those are some resources we always make available to you as well. And we also are going to spend some time talking about the implication that this might have in some of the policy procedures in the future. Let me just, as a program note, mention that during the bottom of the hour, we're going to spend some time looking at a couple of the articles I've posted. Americans who won't take the vaccine, a very significant concern given the fact that we've had 1 million new cases in about 5 days, and some hospitals really exceeding capacity. Also, the reaction oftentimes is, well, let's just close everything down. 33 million Californians right now are saying we can't go anywhere. And what does that have an impact on? One of the other articles we have, online learning and how that has tanked grades. We'll also get into some other very important issues. And I might just, as a program note, also mention next hour, Pastor Tom Nelson will be with us as we talk about the GAP program. But we want to welcome to the microphone right now James Taylor. He has been elected as the president of the Heartland Institute. We have a link to heartland.org. He has been the director of the Heartland Center for Climate and Environmental Policy. You no doubt have probably seen him on CNN and Fox News and PBS and a number of others speaking about the issue of energy and the environment. And he published a piece a while back, Senator Whitehouse threatens to prosecute climate realist if Democrats take Senate. So it illustrates that point. And so, James Taylor, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
No, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Let's, if I can, also say that we're not necessarily going to have a debate about climate change. We've had Roy Spencer on this program. We've had Fred Singer on this program. We had Mark Morano on this program, Michael Schellenberger. I think it'd at least be fair to say that even if you're one of those individuals that is convinced that we need to do something, there is not a lot of evidence for the what some people call climate alarmism. But nevertheless, your piece reminds us that U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who is from Rhode Island, and we have listeners in Rhode Island, basically have threatened that anybody that would be speaking out on climate issues, or in some cases, I think he was also focusing on this book, Why Scientists Disagree About Global Warming, that they may actually prosecute you as individuals. I've always heard people say that, and I go, they're really not that serious about it. But these people are starting to say it if they think they can actually control not only the House and the Senate, but have somebody in the Oval Office that wants to push forward with any kind of prosecution of you so-called climate realists. Tell us more, if you might.
Right, and people may scoff, but this is coming from Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, U.S. Senator from Rhode Island, in an interview in which he was asked with, what would you like to do if Democrats prevail in the Georgia races? So now you have control of all three levers of government. In the Senate, what would you like to do, especially because Whitehouse has particularly strong power even among Democrats? I'm going to read you an excerpt here. It tells you all you need to know. He says, quote, "If we are not vigorously investigating that with all the tools at our disposal," and he's talking about climate change and people who are spreading climate realism, or in his word, climate denial. "If we are not vigorously investigating that with all the tools at our disposal, then that machinery will continue undisturbed to do its dirty work of denial and obstruction. If it's having to explain itself to legislative committees or produce discovery about its activities in litigation or potentially in grand juries, then there's a whole different complexion to our prospects going forward." And then he singled out my organization specifically, who funded 200,000 fake textbooks that the Heartland Institute mailed around to school teachers all around the country. That's a hell of a big expense. Now, to be clear, when he says, or even potentially in grand juries is a criminal process.
Yes, it is.
That's not some type of legislative investigation or even a civil suit. That is what you do when you want to put people in jail. And that is a very daunting and dire threat. And also when he talks about he would like to investigate and potentially put us in front of criminal prosecution for sending out a book called Why Scientists Disagree About Global Warming. That book was written by PhD climate scientists. To my knowledge, Senator Whitehouse does not have a PhD, nor does he have any particular expertise in climate science. It is an attempt to stifle and eliminate free discussion and scientific inquiry under the threat of criminal prosecution. And people need to be aware of that and to prepare, because it comes for one group of people at one point in time, and then it'll come for everybody else.
And again, the point you're making is that you were providing that. And one of the signers of that and the writers was Fred Singer, who I've mentioned before, PhD, Robert Carter, Craig. And of course, there are a variety of other individuals. Even in my climate change piece, I talk about the fact that you have even people like Bjorn Lomborg, the skeptical environmentalist, who says, yes, we have climate concerns and the climate has been changing, but this extremism is really dangerous. And so, first of all, let's talk about that expense, because you actually, I think, sent out, if I remember right, 300,000 copies, but it's not like taxpayers are paying for it, was it?
No, those are donations from people who believe it's important for organizations like ours to tell the truth. This was a publication written by PhD climate scientists, peer-reviewed. The publication itself is peer-reviewed, and the entirety of the publication is a discussion with references and citations to the peer-reviewed scientific literature and objective data. It's also ironic that he would, Senator Whitehouse complains about how this is dark money because he cannot get the names of the people who donate to us and therefore harass them and threaten them with prosecution. The vast majority of our donors, as Heartland has said again and again and again, is private individuals who have no personal financial gain in the debate. They're just interested in truth. On the other hand, while Sheldon Whitehouse makes all these claims about the nefariousness of dark money, Senator Whitehouse does not disclose the names of people who donate to his campaign. Moreover, Sheldon Whitehouse is heavily financed by the renewable power industry. And when he goes out and attacks conventional energy sources, he is doing the bidding, the financial bidding of his benefactors. That is a far more grievous and concerning situation than private individuals who have no financial dog in the fight saying we believe that scientific knowledge should be spread. He's out there actually attacking American companies to benefit other companies who donate to his political campaigns.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we want to talk about where does some of that money go, because you may have read recently that Jeff Bezos, he's allowed to contribute as well, but gave, I think, $10 billion to advance this idea of climate alarmism, and that went to a number of places. I don't see that as dark money because we know where it went, but we'll talk about that. And I'm thinking $10 billion is just a lot more than your annual budget. So we'll come back and get into some of those issues. And, of course, give you a chance if you want to make a comment or ask a question, because if nothing else, it just reminds us again, one of the things we saw over the weekend, what's at stake in these 2 U.S. Senate races in Georgia. We'll continue that conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Recent studies of media bias in the last election are a reminder that we need to have discernment when we read, hear, and watch the news and visit websites. A number of studies for the last 2 years confirm that a majority of Americans are concerned about fake news. Today and tomorrow, I want to discuss 2 studies of media bias and their impact on the 2020 election. It isn't much of a surprise that a recent study has now concluded that Google bias may have shifted at least 6 million votes to Democrat Joe Biden. The surprise in the study is that it came from Dr. Robert Epstein, who is a Harvard-trained Democrat. The researchers collected 500,000 election-related searches and concluded that conservatives got slightly more bias in their search results than liberals did. He wondered how you could account for that and then found what he called a smoking gun. He found a period of days when the vote reminder on Google's homepage was being sent only to liberals. Not one of our conservative field agents received a vote reminder during those days. When Epstein went public with his findings, Google apparently shut off that manipulation that night. For the next 4 days before the election, they were showing vote reminders to everyone. Epstein and his team concluded that the manipulations they discovered so far could easily have shifted at least 6 million votes in just one direction. That is the bare minimum. To calculate the maximum, they still have much more data to examine. He also made it clear on more than one occasion that he is not a Trump supporter. He is a supporter of democracy. He may have wanted Biden to win, but he wanted this election to be fair. Yes, we all want elections to be fair, and so I commend him for his research. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue for a few more minutes talking with James Taylor as we talk about what is available. And we have this article, Senator Whitehouse threatens to prosecute climate realist if Democrats take Senate. Part of the Heartland Institute. We have a link to heartland.org. We'll talk about a couple of other things on the website. But I thought for just a minute, James, let's, if we can, focus on the money I just mentioned from Jeff Bezos. He's a billionaire. He has lots of money, and he wants to actually use it to advance this idea of climate alarmism. And so as a result, I think you should also pay attention to where that money goes. Oftentimes there's such a big deal made about whether a particular organization got some money from ExxonMobil, which I think is probably less likely because, if nothing else, they're really starting to talk more and more about green energy and everything like that. But it goes both ways. You know, if it's sauce for the liberal activist goose, it certainly should be sauce for the conservative activist, conservative gander. So what's your thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. And it is ironic, and that $10 billion is not the only huge gift that has been given to climate activists over recent years. Gifts of hundreds of millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars are commonplace. For comparison, our budget at the Heartland Institute varies from year to year, but it's typically around $5 million for the year. That's
less than 10 billion, right? Yes.
It's far less than 10 billion. 5 million is even just a spit on the sidewalk compared to groups such as the Sierra Club, the Natural Resources Defense Council, et cetera. And yet you hear about all this nefarious money that's being poured in, and it's because of people buying and selling. Listen, if I could be bought or sold, if the Heartland Institute could be bought and sold, we'd be on the other side of the debate, where we'd be in the tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars each year. But we stand up for truth. We believe in truth. and we're not going to be quiet about the truth. And it's also interesting, as you mentioned, where is that $10 billion going?
Oh, yes.
Much of that, although it will go to, some of that will go to environmental activist groups, but much of it goes to research institutions run by the government and by universities, where they know darn well that they are being funded in huge dollar sums in order to promote the agenda of climate activism. And this is something that Dwight Eisenhower warned about in his farewell address to Congress and the American people, when he said that we have to be aware of what he termed, if I can remember the exact term, but the industrial government, that's not quite the exact term, but basically it was of the government,
military industrial
industry
complex.
and government.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. In which case you have government sending money for research, and in this case private institutions sending money for research, with a desired result, and therefore scientific inquiry is no longer what is being pursued, but instead political ends.
You know, one of the things that I've been writing about, of course, has been the climate change, and we have this little booklet that we still make available to individuals. But the most recent one is on energy and the environment. You might say, why did you do one on that? Well, because it relates to what's on the Heartland Institute. What will the Green New Deal do? Up until now, I think most people said, look, you know, Joe Biden is really not Bernie Sanders, and certainly he's not going to pursue that. But then with Kamala Harris, then when you start seeing some of the people that are being suggested to be on his cabinet, I think we're going to hear a lot more about the Green New Deal than we thought we would. And again, that's another area of research you've done at the Heartland Institute. What would be the impact if we were to try to pass a Green New Deal and implement it on the American economy?
Well, the reason why you don't hear so much about it now is because the cost would be punitive and extreme. Studies that have been conducted have come to pretty much the same conclusion. If you just look at the energy aspects, if you don't look at all the other things that have been added to the Green New Deal regarding jobs, programs, and everything else, which are still at the core of the Green New Deal, but just the energy components of going to zero emissions energy sources, it would cost the American economy $10 trillion or more.
Wow.
That is approximately $1 million per American household. I don't think most American households have that amount of money to spend just to say that we are reducing emissions somewhat, when in fact we're already leading the world in reducing carbon dioxide emissions.
And again, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's another thing we've talked about before. There will be an attempt, and I'm sure it'll be probably successful, to have us re-engage with the Paris Accord. But many of the other signers of that actually have not done a very good job of reducing carbon emissions, and the United States has. And so some people might be thinking, James, well, how does that happen? You're not even part of the Accord. You don't even have the force of this treaty making you do that. But what you do have is an advanced economy and also a desire to use the most effective and most efficient ways to produce energy. And so we have perhaps done a better job of reducing our carbon emissions than any other country that's one of the signers. Fair?
Absolutely. What this is at its heart, it's not so much concern about the planet. It's a desire to subjugate America's economy to global oversight, and better yet, to chase out all aspects of capitalism and free market mechanisms from the American economy. Yes. We have, without dispute, reduced emissions faster and more significantly than any other country in the world since the beginning of the century. Over 20 years, Republican administrations, Democratic administrations alike, because we have not subjected ourselves to socialist programs, and because we have not said this is how we're going to do it in a top-down manner. By empowering the free market to enact technologies, to allow technologies such as fracking for natural gas, which produces much less emissions than coal power, for example, we're reducing emissions faster than any other nation in the world, and the collectivists and the globalists hate us for it.
Yes. Well, again, let's just talk about, just before I let you go, what's at the Heartland Institute. I mentioned a couple of resources we have around the table here, but you have some as well. Some great material, some videos, some articles, publications. So what will people find when they go to heartland.org?
Well, I appreciate that. At Heartland, we address a whole spectrum of issues from a free market perspective. For example, we host the climaterealism.com website, which gives daily updates on the asserted media's climate scares. We have climateataglance.com, which is summaries by topic of climate topics. We also have the stoppingsocialism.com website, in which we unearth what is behind the motivation of these leftist programs. And for anybody who appreciates our efforts at the Heartland Institute, you can go to heartland.org. You can make a donation. You can get in touch with us. It'd be great if we went from 5 million to 5.1 million, 5.2 million to fight the $10 billion at one time from the other side, just in one donation.
And again, it's heartland.org. We also have, if people click on your picture there, they can see your Twitter feed and your Facebook page, so they can follow you there. And, of course, we mentioned this article, Senator Whitehouse threatens to prosecute climate realist if Democrats take Senate. Yeah, I've heard some people say that, and I've just figured it was hyperbole. And now you have a person that's actually saying, that's why we need to take the Senate, because this is what we can do. And it's a little bit scary, but it's an illustration, again, why these two Senate races in Georgia are so important and why we need to pay attention to what's happening in the political sphere. So, James Taylor, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
We are going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get into a couple of other issues. One of the first articles is by Red State, which is really a survey that is of concern, because we're finding that a certain number of Americans are saying, you know, even if the vaccine's available, we're not sure we want to take it. So I want to get into that. We also have an article that we've posted on the devastating impact, once again, of online learning. We mentioned it last week with Deborah Saunders. This one comes out of Virginia, but also just shows the number of kids that are getting Fs because of online learning. Now, the best and the brightest kids, well, they are probably self-motivated, or else they have parents that are motivated, so they're doing okay. It's the kids that were just sort of doing satisfactory that are falling behind, and in some cases, the number of Fs being given out is doubled, sometimes tripled, and so anybody that thinks that online learning is working very well needs to reconsider that. And also a very good survey that has just come out, published by John Fund, illustrating that the mainstream media did a really poor job of covering the pandemic, and in many cases focused on fear and panic and did not give the accurate stories that you found in other newspapers and other media in other countries. I have a theory. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact they disliked Donald Trump and the coronavirus task force so much that they would never give any positive stories. And even when cases a while back were declining, they talked about them increasing. They never really spent much time talking about vaccines. And they focused a disproportionate amount of time on hydroxychloroquine, to mention just a few examples of that. So we're going to come back and talk about that briefly. Also, a very good piece that we've posted here by Andrew McCarthy on the war on the Electoral College, something we've been following and he writes about, and many other stories that we'll be talking about. All that coming up right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, let me just mention that in about a half an hour, we're going to have Pastor Tom Nelson, and he is a pastor, of course, of Denton Bible Church, been on the program with us many times before. He has a GAP program, which is just an outstanding, if you will, GAP program between high school and college. And given the lockdowns and the fact that so many young people are going to college by getting on their laptop computers in their bedrooms, this might be a good time to really rethink whether or not you want to send this 18-year-old off to college, because they're not really going off to college and having a college experience. But even if they're going off to college, oftentimes if they're not equipped to know who they are and how to defend their faith, what a disaster. And so that's one of the reasons why we so often emphasize the Mind Games Conference and Summit Ministries. But if you really want to have an entire year, these GAP programs that exist in some of these locales are just so well done, and I would highly recommend it. So we're going to spend some time talking with him. He's also been a pastor, and so has thought about how to relate to the pandemic, and also came down with COVID-19. So I want to get some of his thoughts about that as well. While we're talking about it, we won't spend a lot of time, but to simply remind everybody that if you're a listener in California, I'm already telling you what you already know, but for the rest of you listeners around the country, about 33 million Californians are now under a new regional stay-at-home order. It began last night. The Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti said, if you're able to stay home, which I think is good advice because, after all, you are less likely to get in contact with so many individuals that actually are testing positive. 1 million new cases in just the last few days, and more to add to that all the time. One of the reasons why there is beginning to be somewhat of a backlash, and why I think some people aren't necessarily paying attention to these mandates, is due to the fact that we have a growing number of individuals in positions of political authority that are violating, or put it another way, breaking their own rules. And this isn't just comments coming from us here or from a variety of conservative talk show hosts and others. Just the other day, I've got a commentary coming out next week in which I quote from a CNN host, Breonna Keller, who actually came down on a number of Democratic leaders. That would be California Governor Gavin Newsom, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, San Francisco Mayor London Breed, Denver Mayor Michelle Hancock. And after listening to all of the politicians' offenses, she reminded the audience that, you know what? Trust is built slowly, but it evaporates faster than reservations at a fancy restaurant. Kind of know where she's going with that. And said, you've been so busy criticizing some of these Republicans that maybe aren't wearing a mask. Perhaps you should go and look in a mirror and recognize one of the reasons why people aren't paying attention to some of these mandates. Because, we've pointed out that sometimes people aren't necessarily taking these seriously. And there's a lot of reasons, but one of those is you see too many people in positions of authority saying, do what I say, not what I do. A couple examples, of course, Gavin Newsom and London Breed said you're supposed to wear a mask, you're supposed to maintain social distancing, and then guess what? We see them shoveling down expensive food at the French Laundry in Napa, California, with no mask, sitting elbow to one another. You have the mayor of Austin, Texas, sends a message that you should stay home, and he's sending the message while he's in Cabo, Mexico. Oh, you just can't make this stuff up. And then you think of those who really are at the target demographic group. That would be those over the age of 80. That'd be Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. That'd be Senator Dianne Feinstein. And again, they tell us that we should wear masks, we should be careful, and then we see them without masks. So part of the problem is they need to actually set the standard, and some are not. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised that the most recent Pew Research Center poll, and we've posted this as our first article points out that there is a group of individuals that are pretty sure they are not going to take the vaccine. I'll quote from the Pew Research poll that says black adults are much less likely to say they would get a vaccine other than other Americans. Just 32%, less than a third of adults, say they would definitely or probably get the COVID-19 vaccine, compared with 52% of white adults, 56% of Hispanics, and nearly three-quarters, 72% of Asian Americans. I love that. They're most likely, by the way, to wear masks, most likely to get the vaccine. Kind of interesting. And so, you look at the reasons why, and in one of the articles, we remind people that sometimes African Americans have a history of remembering things like the Tuskegee experiments that took place from the 1930s all the way up to the early 1970s, was treating black men, and it's really sad history of America. So there's really going to be a need to see if we can illustrate that this is going to be a safe vaccine. And so kudos to Ernest Grant, African American, who is the president of the American Nurses Association, in which he participated in the trial for the COVID-19 vaccines, and even on CNN said that although the trial is double-blinded, meaning researchers and participants don't actually know who's getting the real vaccine, he was very confident that the vaccine is safe. And he was really recommending that black leaders take the vaccine so that they can share their experience and knowledge within their community. You may have noticed recently that you've had a number of former presidents, people like Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, who announced that they would take the vaccine in order to encourage other adults to do so. I've had some people say, well, when the members of Congress, when the president takes the vaccine, when the vice president takes the vaccine, I think it would be a great, if you will, photo op for Barack Obama, George Bush, Bill Clinton, maybe certainly Donald Trump, and maybe even Mike Pence, all in the Oval Office to get vaccinated, just as a way to say we think this is safe, because if nothing else, that's a concern. So part of it has to do with the fact that we have some individuals that are skeptical about the vaccine, maybe because it came from Trump or because of past history. Some of them are skeptical about doing any kind of social distancing because, after all, we don't see our leaders doing it. But another part of that, before we take a break, comes from a very good piece by John Funn. It actually came out after I'd posted these articles, but I may post it tomorrow or maybe even do a commentary, because what you have is a study that came out. Why is all COVID-19 news bad news? Researchers, actually professors at Dartmouth College and Brown University, published this through the National Bureau of Economic Research, and they found something very troubling, and that is U.S. media, especially elite U.S. media, did a very poor job of covering the pandemic. 91% of the stories in U.S. major media outlets were negative, compared to only 54% in non-U.S. major sources. In other words, 9 out of 10 stories were negative, where it was about 50-50 if you go to England or France or Belgium or Turkey or wherever it might be. And so much of the stories also focused a lot of attention on Donald Trump and hydroxychloroquine, which I think illustrates the point, because the press was so against Donald Trump. They couldn't even actually give even positive news about the disease, about the pandemic, because it was an election year. They also found an incredible disconnect as well in terms of talking about reopening the schools, because they found that the reporting was overwhelmingly negative, even while the scientific literature was much more optimistic. One research study that just came out found the infection rate among students is very low. That's an understatement. 14 of 100%, less than 1% by a long shot, and that schools were not super spreaders. But again, maybe the press very negative, because after all, it was President Donald Trump, it was Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, that said we should send the kids back to school. And then when it came to the covering of the development of the vaccine, they found that some of these stories didn't even surface. Stories that surfaced in February about what was being done, for example, with AstraZeneca and Oxford and others, some of those didn't even surface till April or May, which is just amazing to me. And that even when they did, they only talked about one promising vaccine rather than two, and now we have three. And so I looked it up, and I thought, well, when's the first time we started talking about getting a vaccine produced by the pharmaceutical companies? That would be January 28th. Now, to be giving credit where credit is due, that was a piece by Dr. Merrill Matthews, who joined us on Friday. But you also have various articles and other things and discussions that we had about Pfizer, about Moderna, and about AstraZeneca. So again, the press did a horrible job of covering the pandemic. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they didn't like Donald Trump. So they weren't going to say anything positive about the vaccine or about the pandemic or about even going back to school. That's why I hope you take some time to listen to Point of View. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and let me just mention again, we're going to have Pastor Tommy Nelson on with us in about 15 minutes. But just before we head on to some other articles, let me just mention very quickly that tomorrow we're going to have a couple of guests. We'll also have John Stonestreet with us on Wednesday. We have Jim Dennison on Thursday. So it's going to be quite a number of individuals that we'll be talking with throughout the week. But we'll also have some time to kind of give you an update on where we are in terms of some of these various various legal challenges. Tomorrow is the safe harbor deadline. In case you're not familiar with what that is, it requires that the various states will have certified the election results by tomorrow, and the actual vote for the Electoral College takes place next Monday. So we'll keep watching that. And there are some lists that people have created of the various things that have been surfaced in terms of voter fraud or various legal challenges. So those are all resources we'll try to make available to you. Might also mention that one of the articles that I've posted here by Senator John Barrasso reminds us that if indeed the Senate is still held by the Republicans, and I would hope so just for the check and balance that might provide, he says that in some respects, Senate Democrats did everything they could to delay Trump's nominees. He says Republicans won't forget. And in this, he reminds us that President Clinton and President Obama both were able to get the vast majority of their various nominees actually confirmed, and yet Donald Trump at the end of January had 3. Whereas Bill Clinton had 13 of his 14, Barack Obama had 11 of his 15. If you start looking at the various roadblocks that were put up there, Democrats, he argues, attempted to block 79 executive branch appointments in the first 2 years of Donald Trump's administration by doing all sorts of things, by having questions for the record, voting in block against nominees in committee, consistently refusing to consent to routine floor votes, using of cloture procedures, which then had 30 hours of post-cloture debate, and on and on and on. He says, so if Republicans hold the majority of the Senate next year, we'll have the ability to reject Mr. Biden's nominees. Unlike the Democrats, he said, we'll use that power responsibly. A Republican Senate will treat mainstream nominees fairly, but the unprecedented obstruction of the previous administration will have lasting consequences for future administrations. Some Democrats put in place new standards and norms. They won't be easily washed away. So it's one of the articles. Also one I've posted here by Andrew McCarthy on the war on the Electoral College. And let me take a phone call or two, but then I want to get into some of the other sad and troubling implications of some of these lockdowns. But if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Tom listening in Florida. Tom, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yeah, I'm calling just to urge everybody to contact their congressmen and urge them not to certify Biden as the winner when Congress meets on January 6th to certify the Electoral College results. Mo Brooks of Alabama said that he's going to vote he's going to object on that date. So it takes one representative and one senator to object. And so he's going to be the one representative. So everybody needs to call their congressman and tell them not to certify Biden as the winner. It was on the news today. 64 members of Pennsylvania legislature wrote a letter urging Congress not to certify Biden on that date.
Yes, and again, some of this has to do with what is called the safe harbor vote that needs to take place by tomorrow, but that's just at the states. Tom is talking about, and this is interesting because we talked about this on the Friday weekend edition, that when indeed there was an attempt to convince some electors not to vote for Donald Trump 4 years ago, which you had some of those individuals that did so, or they threatened not to, and one was removed, another was censured. That also then led to a attempt in the House of Representatives when the two bodies gathered together to challenge the certification, and that's when then Vice President Joe Biden said, look, guys, it's really much over. In this particular case, that vice president will be Mike Pence. And if indeed he gets at least one member of the House, one member of the Senate, and that's at least possible, then it might develop into a debate. Where it goes from there, who knows? I am not making predictions in the year 2020. So, again, Tom, I thank you for bringing that up. That's a little early in the game, but again, this might be a place where you could express your opinions in that regard. And, of course, we'll be following those events in the next few days. But just before we end, there are some very dire consequences to the lockdown. And this particular study that just came out from the Gallup poll found that the latest assessment, I'm quoting from them, of the mental health of Americans is worse than it's been at any point in the last 2 decades. If you look, the chart, it goes like this and then just drops. And I think a lot of that has to do with the pandemic, but also has to do with the lockdown. And if you look at some of the deeper issues and look at how that's affected gender, party affiliation, religious service, race, marital status, age group, household income, every group dropped except one, which they don't really even talk about, but I thought it was kind of interesting. Every one of these dropped from last year, and one actually increased by 4 points, and that was individuals who weekly attend religious services. So the church is actually the one place where people have become even a little more optimistic, while everybody else has become more pessimistic. This is a place where people actually feel like their mental health is improved, while everyone else in every other demographic group has felt like mental health may be declined. I thought that was an interesting fact that wasn't really highlighted that much by the Gallup poll, but was certainly helpful. And it also brings me to I guess it'd be the fourth article we've posted today. We talked about this the other day with Deborah Sanders, who writes for the San Francisco Chronicle, but this one now comes from Mary Margaret Olahan for Daily Caller, in which they have actually found that virtual learning or online learning has been a complete disaster. What a surprise, right? Here's a couple of quotes from the report. Results indicate a widening gap between students who were previously performing satisfactorily and those performing unsatisfactorily. Because those who were performing well, they still did okay. And I think the bottom line is a student is going to learn whether they are in a classroom or whether they're online, whether they have self-motivated study skills or whether the parents are motivating them. But by contrast, students who were previously not performing well perform considerably less well, and that is an understatement. They found the percentage of middle school and high school students dropped dramatically. As a matter of fact, it was an increase of about 83%. For example, middle schoolers had a 300% increase in the number of Fs that were given out after the particular semester or quarter, whatever they were in at the time. While high schoolers had about a 50% increase in Fs. And again, some of those that were struggling the most, as you might imagine, those with disabilities. You know, just think about whatever it might be. I mean, it just might be a learning disability like ADHD, or it could be, dyslexia. It could be actually a physical disability or something like that. And then the others that were hurt were students learning English. Maybe those who have come over here were immigrants or their parents moved here from a foreign country. The percentage of Fs rose by 106%. And so we can see once again, as we've said on this program, these lockdowns have some incredible cost. There's minimal benefit and there's massive cost. And that, of course, doesn't even talk about the suicides and depression and drug abuse and all the other things that we certainly have talked about. So those articles are on our website, pointofview.net. We're going to come back and spend some time talking with Pastor Tom Nelson about the GAP program. All that coming up right after this.
Election day has come and gone, so tell me, do people like you need to be more or less vigilant, more or less informed, more or less involved in making an impact? I think the answer is clear. Those who value freedom of conscience and religious liberty need to do more than ever to stand up for what the founders gave us and put America on track for greatness. Yes, we face challenges, but it's in the hard times that the greatest victories are seized and won. I urge you today, right now, to seize this opportunity and join the Point of View Radio Truth Team. Be part of the solution our nation needs. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The election is not the end of anything. It's another beginning. And when you join the Truth Team, you make it possible for millions of people to get the real news they desperately need and the practical marching orders that Kerby and the team at Point of View Radio give each day. Join us now in this critical moment. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to be talking about the GAP program. And of course, there have been a number of GAP programs over the years to really help young people that graduate from high school, really don't know where they're going, maybe really need some life skills, understand what it means to be a godly man or a godly woman. And so I've always wanted to feature any of those. And one that we talked about a year or two ago was what was called the GAP program at Denton Bible Church. And this has been such an outstanding success. I wanted to bring it to you again. There are good reasons to consider taking a GAP. One, if they are really still trying to figure out who they are, if they really need to develop some social skills, but especially right now where a lot of young people are, quote, going out to college or going off to college, and they're really in the bedrooms of their home actually taking courses. I mean, this is not the best way to even experience college. And so this is all the more reason why I think you might want to consider the GAP program for your children or for your grandchildren. So we bring back to the microphone somebody's been on the program with us many times before. Pastor Tommy Nelson, senior pastor at Denton Bible Church, has served on the staff of Denton Bible for nearly 40 years. We, of course, have talked to him about the various books he's written on, the various speaking that he has done in so many different venues, and also now developing the GAP program. We have information about it on our website. We, of course, have information about Denton Bible. We also have one to gap.dentonbible.org. Don't even need to remember all that because we have the link. And so he joins us now by phone. So, Tommy Nelson, always great to have you on the program.
Great to hear you, Kerby, up here in Denton, Texas. Hope things are doing well down in Dallas.
We are doing well. And before we get to the GAP program, I think we did mention that you actually had COVID-19, and I'm sure some people would like to know how you're doing, and maybe if that's given you a new and fresh experience as a pastor on how to address and minister to people during this pandemic.
You know, I did get it. It's kind of more of a nuisance. You've got three things. You've got fever, and then you watch your lungs, and then you got fatigue. And so I got a nebulizer and took breathing treatments with a steroid, and then I took a Z-Pack to get my fever down, which is a steroid. It ended my Olympic career, however, because I can't be tested now. And the last thing was simply fatigue, and that just goes away, 10 days to about 2 weeks, slow and sure. But what is really good is having a quality doctor that knows what he's doing, that as soon as it hits you, you get in touch with you, and he'll take care of your lungs, your fever, and then you just wait out the fatigue, and it's no real problem. And I'm 70 years old, and I made it.
You're doing well. And again, I can't even imagine slowing you down, so it's hard to even imagine that. But let's get into the GAP program. First of all, I think one of the reasons you wanted to come on is that you surveyed some of the young men that you have in the program and asked them where they heard about it. And I think a fair number of them heard about it through Point of View.
Yes, they did. And, it's so sometimes deceiving when you're just talking there in the studio over that oval table, and then you find out that people all around the country are listening into it. And so I love to do stuff with Kerby Anderson.
Let's, if we can, give you a little bit of the history, too. I think a number of our listeners know you, but over the years, you've had young guns. You've poured your life into so many young people. So in some respects, even though this is a new program, in some respects, you've been doing this for a long time and recognize what it takes to really develop godly men and women, haven't you?
Yeah, and I've been, for a long time, taking graduates of college that all through history, if whether you're Plato or whether you are Aristotle or Socrates, you take college-aged men. Princeton would take young, late teenaged men and train them. The communists would go to the college campuses. You get the young guys. And so Bill Bright would get the young guys. Dawson Trotman get the young guys. So I would take young guys, and I would take them, Kerby, when they were getting out of college. And over about 20-plus years, we've all found out that college is no longer what college used to be, that it was always kind of your ticket on to the rest of your life. And then in the mid-20th century, we changed worldviews, and we have now become a post-Christian society, and we no longer assume the things we assumed, and people in the intelligentsia are now, with college kids, committed to destroy their faith, to give to them a secular, humanistic, naturalistic, atheistic worldview of which man is the standard of all things. And as a result, you lose a sense of marriage, a sense of morality, a sense of life's purpose. And so college got to where it was no longer the help, it was the adversary. And so the GAP program is to take guys that have not gone to college and to get them ready for the world they're about to step into, to which college will help you to make a living, but it won't help you make a life. It's never, ever tried to help you make a life, but it wasn't quite so adversarial. I mean, you're a Berkeley man. If anybody ought to know, you ought to. College wasn't always so adversarial, and now it has become adversarial. So we take these young guys and get them ready for the rest of their lives.
I remember when I joined Pro Ministries, and that was back when the Earth's crust was still warm, I guess, back in 1976. And we had even a brochure back then that says, you know, when your kids go off to college where they lose their faith. Well, if that was a problem in the 1970s, it is really a problem now in 2020. And so a lot of people, as a matter of fact, last time you were on the program, you were talking about how in some respects college just, if you don't know what you're going to believe, it just chews you up and spits you out, doesn't it?
Right. It is not a vacuum, an innocuous vacuum you step into of the old bromide of separation of church and state. It is a very well thought out scientific, philosophic, psychological, sociological, moral, familial. It has an agenda and a worldview on the absence of ultimate meaning, of moral absolutes, and the great institutions of the military, the police, the home, marriage, the business ethic, that those are now in the wind. They're up, and we have lost our absolutes on them. And the college campus will decide those absolutes for you. And when they give you your psychological test, your psychology, your sociology, your biology, they will punish you, flunk you, fail you if you do not reciprocate that atheistic worldview. And so when you send a kid off to college, I mean, you're talking about an 18-year-old that is going to get ganged up on by an entire industry that has been schooled in atheism. And so parents had better be careful when they ship their kids off. And I'm talking about Baylor, SMU, TCU, Wake Forest, any place, you'd better be careful where you send those kids.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the instructors. We're going to talk about some of the coursework, some of the field work as well. Most importantly, how maybe you can encourage, because it's going to take a little bit of encouragement to your children and grandchildren to go. And sometimes there's heel marks at the back of the room, but once they get into it, they love it. But they are convinced that they don't need it until they get into it and realize how much they did need it. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Recent studies of media bias in the last election are a reminder that we need to have discernment when we read, hear, and watch the news and visit websites. A number of studies for the last 2 years confirm that a majority of Americans are concerned about fake news. Today and tomorrow, I want to discuss 2 studies of media bias and their impact on the 2020 election. It isn't much of a surprise that a recent study has now concluded that Google bias may have shifted at least 6 million votes to Democrat Joe Biden. The surprise in the study is that it came from Dr. Robert Epstein, who is a Harvard-trained Democrat. The researchers collected 500,000 election-related searches and concluded that conservatives got slightly more bias in their search results than liberals did. He wondered how you could account for that and then found what he called a smoking gun. He found a period of days when the vote reminder on Google's homepage was being sent only to liberals. Not one of our conservative field agents received a vote reminder during those days. When Epstein went public with his findings, Google apparently shut off that manipulation that night. For the next 4 days before the election, they were showing vote reminders to everyone. Epstein and his team concluded that the manipulations they discovered so far could easily have shifted at least 6 million votes in just one direction. That is the bare minimum. To calculate the maximum, they still have much more data to examine. He also made it clear on more than one occasion that he is not a Trump supporter. He is a supporter of democracy. He may have wanted Biden to win, but he wanted this election to be fair. Yes, we all want elections to be fair, and so I commend him for his research. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Pastor Tom Nelson with us of Denton Bible, and we're talking about the GAP program. By the way, if you'd like to join our conversation, sometimes you have questions or want to know a little bit more about the program, that number is 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. And Tommy, for just a minute, let's talk about the instructors, because, again, some of the parents and grandparents are saying, okay, what am I entrusting my son or even in the future my daughter to? And I would have to say that most of your instructors are people they've heard on Point of View. We had, for example, the program director, Drew Anderson, on this program, and so they've had a chance to hear from him. Of course, they've had a chance to hear you on numerous occasions here on Point of View. Charles Stolfus has been on oftentimes with Dr. Merrill Matthews. So these are quality teachers who actually can pour their lives into these young men and women and actually give them a sense of what it means to be a godly man or woman and to really focus on biblical manhood and womanhood.
You know, that's right. Drew Anderson is a Dallas Seminary THM. Charles is a Dallas Seminary THM. Drew's about to get his doctorate at Southern Seminary. I'm just an MABS, but I'm on the board of Dallas Theological Seminary. So we pour into these guys basically about 3 things. I do Bible exposition for them on the great topics. Charles Stolfus does systematic theology and apologetics. Drew talks to them about crucial crux, cross areas of life where you can go one way or the other. He talks to them about character, about morality, about marriage, about leadership, development. And then they do a lot of practical things. They all go out on a hunt. They all shoot a deer, skin a deer, gut a deer, cook a deer. They do stuff with automotive mechanics, with heating and air conditioning, with you name it. They get a whole lot of life. And they all live with a host family. And because we just don't want to take 18-year-old guys out there and throw them out there. Otherwise, they'll end up like, well, me and you. You know what I'm saying, Kirby? And we don't want that. We have a responsibility to these guys. So they're with a host family. So that's kind of the trident of practicality, of the hard issues of life, practical living, and then Bible and theology. So we try to get a well-rounded guy that can at least compete out in the world he's going to step out into.
And again, some of these attributes all start with the letter S, stewardship, stamina, and skills. And I think it's important to recognize because you're thinking about the whole person. And even in the best environments, you oftentimes only in the university have the intellectual part. Even in the churches, sometimes just the spiritual part, maybe in terms of various kinds of camping programs or Boy Scouts or whatever, maybe the physical part or in sports. And in some respects, you're trying to pull all of that together because, after all, we really want to minister to the whole person, don't we?
Yes, we do. As a matter of fact, we've got a guy named Sam Martin, who was a professional baseball player, and he takes them out and abuses them physically. By the time they finish, we want them to be able to run a 10K. And so, is that right? A 10K. And so they work out physically, and it's to try to address the entire man. That's what we're trying to do.
Let's, if we can, just talk about what is entailed in that, because I know we'll probably get some questions if some people want to ask about that. In terms of the length of the program, the cost, you've already alluded to the fact that they stay with a host family, but what are some other details that people need to know about?
Well, the program will start in, about September, and it will go until May. And so we take about a month off for Christmas, and so altogether it's about 7.5 to 8 months that they're with us, and it's 5 days a week, morning till mid-afternoon, and it's just kind of where a kid just kind of calls off his life for a whole year and does nothing but Bible, character, and we also address, Kirby, the world that they're in.
Yes.
We take a look at how we got from the Judeo-Christian worldview in the 1800s, and by the end of the Enlightenment and modernism, we ended up with atheism and what it has done to society, so that they can look at the world that we are in and see it through the grid of the world that we had, which is one of the most important things in the world, is to be able to think antithetically. It's been said that was the great contribution of the Jew, is that the Jew could look at the world he was in and he didn't have to buy into it, that he could, with a correct understanding of God who created the heavens and the earth, he could look at the world and say, that is right, that is wrong, that's good, that's better, that's bad. And so it's to give them the ability to have a moral palate and a philosophical palate to be able to make character and moral judgment calls in life.
And again, a lot of that gets back to the issue of discernment. One of the things we talked about even before you came on the air is how, again, the mainstream press has done such a poor job even covering the pandemic, much less covering the last election, covering election fraud, covering all sorts of other issues in the news. And so you're going to have to, if you're going to be effective and really a very keen-eyed Christian, if you're going to be like the sons of Issachar and understood the times in which you live with knowledge of what, in this case, Israel is to do or what we are to do, you're really going to have to develop a level of discernment, sort of a keen eye, and that's another aspect of what you're really trying to teach there at the GAP program, isn't it?
You know, the book of Proverbs says that knowledge is easy to the man who hath understanding. That when you have an understanding of the infinite personal God, of man in his image, of the Word of God, Jesus who redeemed us of right and wrong, where history came from, where it's going, you can now Lord is the beginning of wisdom. If you don't have that, you've pretty much got philosophic moral aids. You have no immune system, and you're going to take in anything that they give you. And so, so often in the Bible, Kerby, you see Solomon saying, my son, my son. You never really see teenagers use that greatly in the Bible. You've got to kind of wait till their mind catches up with their body. And that's kind of why in the book of Proverbs that you have Solomon exhorting the young man to beware of the seductress, the adulteress, beware of materialism, of search your heart, my son, for out of it come the issues of life. It's a very rare kid. I guess Jesus at 12 in the temple was the only one we've got that could go into life where his soul was maturing and have no problems. That the rest of us, our bodies mature in our 18 to early 20s, and then we've been sheltered, hopefully protected, but then our minds, our hearts, souls, spirits have to become very wise and very quick. A wildebeest gives birth, and that wildebeest better be able to walk within minutes, because you know what they say, everything loves wildebeest. And it's kind of the way with a human being. When you hit 18, you start leaving home. You better be able to walk pretty quickly, because violence, sexuality, greed, hedonism, it's on you real quick. And, we're talking about the media, Kerby. You remember a guy, Kerby, named Marshall McLuhan?
Oh, sure. Medium is the message. Yeah.
Yeah, the media is the message. And it made everybody mad because we had always kind of assumed that the greatest criteria of media would be that of objectivity, that it would be kind of a personification of Walter Cronkite, And yet Marshall McLuhan said, media is the message, that you will believe what they tell you to believe. And everybody got mad when he said that. And lo and behold, it came true.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll walk you through a little bit more of the program, the application process, what that entails. Of course, we talked about this idea of discernment. I also want to get into this issue of courage. That is something that we have spent some time talking about as well. You might remember we had Rod Dreher on as we talked about his book, Live Not by Lies, and all sorts of people now are talking about the book. I did some commentaries back in October about it, but John Stone Street will be on with us on Wednesdays talking about that. Kelly Shackelford, who joins us on Fridays, he and his wife are actually doing a Bible study on the book, and it just reminds us that we may not be facing this hard totalitarianism, say, of communist Russia. We're facing the soft totalitarianism of these progressive groups, and you certainly run into it on college campuses, the cancel culture, and all sorts of other things. So we'll come back and talk about that with Tom Nelson. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Be right back.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation with Pastor Tom Nelson. If you would like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Pastor, if we can, Tommy Nelson, let's, if we can, talk about the application process, because if you go to the link that we have on our website, it's gap.dentonbible.org, but you can follow it there. The first thing is to fill out the written portion, and then there's an admissions committee and a number of other things, and you are going to be taking applications. So if indeed somebody is maybe a parent or a grandparent listening to this and thinking this might be just very good for my son or daughter, grandson, granddaughter, the first step, of course, is to fill out the application, but they might want to know what are the demands, because there are some costs involved, and this could be just a great birthday present, Christmas present, graduation present. So take us through the application process and some of the requirements.
The cost of it, Kerby, is $3,500 a year, and once you apply, there is a kind of a vetting. A kid doesn't need to be brilliant. He doesn't need to have a certain grade point. He has to have a motor. You know what I'm saying? He's got to be hungry. He's got to want to. It's not a rehab program. It's a program for guys that are willing to submit themselves to a standard, to, we stress punctuality, attendance, follow through. As a matter of fact, Drew has a monthly meeting with all of the kids, all the men, and he'll go over how they're doing. And so if a kid has a rebellious spirit, we really can't work with him, because that squeaky wheel will get all the grease. And he's got to be a willing kid. He's got to be able to work and play well with others, to get along with people. But we don't have time to try to motivate him. He has to be motivated. He's got to want to learn. And, you know, I guess if there was a standard that these kids achieve, it would be Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Nehemiah, Ezra, Esther, Mordecai, the young men and women that went into the exile and had to stand in a pagan day. It's interesting that in the Old Testament you see this transition from the theocracy of Israel into the exile that becomes then the church. And it's almost as if these courageous Jews that stood in a godless day and held to their faith and put their lives on the line, that they kind of morphed into Peter, Andrew, James, and John. And so the young men have to have that kind of Daniel set his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food, that Ezra set his heart to study the law of the Lord, to keep it and to teach its statutes. They have to have that motor down there that says, I want these things. You know, they kind of be like, Kerby, our great stories about Lincoln that would walk miles just to get a book to read. They have to have that kind of commitment. And once we have that, you can now pour all of the gasoline you can on that fire. I think, Kerby, you and I are both seminary men, and we've seen guys in seminary that really didn't have a spiritual, moral base they should have. And the more knowledge you gave them, the more arrogant they become. You remember those guys?
Oh, yes.
You used to see them and think, boy, they're going to destroy a church in a matter of hours. And so they have to have that kind of instinctive want to. And once you get that in a kid, I don't care how dumb he is or smart he is or how much problems he's had in the past, if he has that want to, as the psalmist said, open thy mouth wide and I will fill it. If they've got that want to, there's no amount of Bible that you can't teach them. So as long as when we do a vetting process, Drew and his guys have to assess, is that kid this type of kid that has got a motor? And if he is, we'll get him ready. Because I think a lot of kids, Kirby, when they graduate high school, they may not be ready 3 months later to head off, to Raleigh-Durham and to begin 4 years getting a degree in what they're not sure about yet. But they would like a time just to learn and grow and to spend time on their own personal lives. That's going to be the foundation of the rest of their future.
I might just mention, too, that when you go to the website, it has a section for young men and a section for young women. And I know that you've had kind of the men in the past, but there's an opportunity now to consider that for both. And I just think it's just an outstanding way to give individuals that are still needing a little seasoning, looking for a little bit more to add to their circumstances, maybe are still trying to figure out who they are in Christ, that they will really benefit, and to just be able to sit under you and others that I'm aware that you have come in and teach and mentor and really pour into their lives. I think it's just an outstanding program. So again, we've got that information at the website at pointofview.net, or you can simply go to dentonbible.org and find the GAP program there as well. But
Kirby, you're right.
Go ahead.
We're going to have it this next year for girls, and so if there are girls out there that want to spend time just working on them and their heart with God and getting their foundation of life, tell them to come our way, and we'll take them.
And again, so both young men and young women. And again, all that is available at the website. But a minute ago, I mentioned the 3 S's. I thought I'd mention the 3 C's. Confidence, and that would be confidence in God's Word, courage, and then calling. And I wanted to come back to that idea of courage, because one of the books that a lot of people are talking about is a book by Rod Dreher, in which he's reminding us that, we may be facing a level of totalitarianism, nothing like the old, hard totalitarianism, Nazi Germany, communist Russia. He was referring to this as what he called soft totalitarianism. But what he's getting at is that you're not going to end up in the gulag or have somebody put you in handcuffs. But if you challenge leftist beliefs on race, gender, sexual orientation, not just on the college campus, but in your business, you are starting to see that various, if you will, woke capitalist organizations, woke businesses, cancel culture. There's going to be a need, Tom Nelson, for us to develop a generation of courageous Christians. And right now, a lot of them are a little too soft. They actually need to have their safe places. They have to get their hot chocolate. They have to have a dog that they can pat. And it's going to get a little tougher for Christians in the future, don't you think?
Yes, it is. I saw a deal a while back that there are, I believe it was Harvard and different colleges that want to know if you supported Trump, because they intend on putting you on the outskirts, that they see it as an immoral thing if you supported a Republican ideology. And that is just, the next step is for you to have a yellow Star of David on you to mark you. And so, yes, you're no longer able to live the Christian life in so much of a vacuum. We are not the home team anymore. And we are seen as standing against, it's going to be like in Egypt, where a Pharaoh arose which did not know Joseph and did not understand the work which he had done. And they now say these Jews are increasing. And so let us act wisely and let's get rid of them and persecute them. And that's just amazing how a satanic culture can be, that forgets that it was in Israel or in Egypt, it was a Jew, Joseph, raised from the dead, rejected by his Jewish brothers that went to the Gentiles, sound like Jesus, that made that culture, that let it survive the famine. And they forgot that. And they began to think that real wisdom, real freedom is going to be to get rid of these believers in God. And same way in Babylon, if anybody does not worship our gods and doesn't bow to our image, we're going to get rid of this guy, and I'm going to give you a little time to think about it, and then into the furnace with you. I don't want you praying. I don't want you not bowing to this thing. And we're not going to tolerate you're doing that. And so we're going to get to that, like you said, that soft totalitarianism that we're going to put the eyeball on you, and we're going to see you askew before you ever begin if you will not yield to this.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about one more thing. We've talked about, of course, the idea of discernment and courage. I want to talk about service, because one of the goals of the GAP program is not only developing biblical manhood and biblical womanhood, but really kind of developing a servant heart service. And I want to talk about the other very significant aspect of the program, and we'll continue that conversation right after these messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Pastor Tommy Nelson with us for a few more minutes as we talk about the GAP program, and I thought we might also focus on this idea of service, because one aspect of biblical manhood, biblical womanhood, is this idea of a sacrificial idea about service. And so we've talked about the importance of discernment and wisdom. We've talked about the importance of courage at a time when there is a great assault on Christian values. But another characteristic, I think, of the GAP program is you really encourage hands-on activity. It's one thing to get head knowledge. It's quite another to not only have head, heart, and hands and feet, and to give, if you will, shoe leather to the things that you're learning. And so another aspect of what you are developing in the GAP program, I believe, is this idea of servant leadership.
Yeah, you can't really disciple men outside of the medium of humanity and the body of Christ. They asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? He said, love God, heart, mind, soul, strength, and your neighbor as yourself. He wouldn't separate them. If we do not love our neighbor whom we can see, you're not going to love God whom you can't see. And so they're inseparable. And so you can't really, and I know, Kerby, you and I have spent our times in seminaries. One of the great griefs that seminarians have, the professors, is that you can teach a kid's head, but it's got to show itself growing in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and men. That you have to grow, your knowledge has to show up in your love towards others. That true knowledge produces holiness, and holiness is love. And so if you're going to teach a kid about God and Christ and the Holy Spirit and systematic theology and Bible and apologetics, if it can't come down to how he treats the widows and the orphans, you remember the words of Jesus' little brother, James, this is true and undefiled religion in the sight of our God, Father, to visit widows and orphans in their affliction. And so it has to show up in how a man lives out his life in the body of Christ. And so we make sure that these guys are ushers in the church, that they pass the tray during communion, they work in the Denton Bible Garden, by which we help feed the poor, that they go to vision ministry, that we have a ministry called Vision Ministry that works with the poor, and they may be down working with them. They may work in Sunday school, and so we want them ministering in the body of Christ. I do the same thing with our Young Guns program that takes college grads, that they all have to be discipling men and teaching and working within the church. Knowledge without service produces arrogance. And one of the great, I think, with young people, that they tend to be very weak in ecclesiology and understanding the totality of the people of God, the temple of God, the flock of God, the bride of Christ, the body of Christ, that we function together with unity and diversity. And so we have to help them get into the body of Christ. So that's all part of the curriculum.
And I might just mention that as you've been doing this, you had some of your fellow students around there, some of the students that are part of the program. But just before we run out of time, let's talk about what this looks like. After months and months of the program, now you've had some success stories. What kind of individuals are you turning out? What do they look like when they come out the other side?
Well, we've only had now 1 year of these guys, and this next year is coming out. But the word that we got from them last year and what we hear this year is a great many of them said that this they felt was a turning point in their lives. We have particularly had some young men that have never really seen a Christian family.
Yes.
Particularly a strong male role model. And I know to some of them last year, that was a great thing, was to watch prayer at the table, the family going to church, the father singing in church, the father praying with his family. To a lot of them, that was altogether new. And so I know one of the things that Drew does is a character assessment and a skills assessment. And he spends time with these young men as to what down inside of them they really love and what excites them. One of our kids found out it was the military. Another found out that it was being a fireman. Another one found out that it was working with manual skills. And so he'll spend that time with them and letting that kid really start to get in touch with what he really loves and what he wants to do. College is not for everybody. And I know some believe that proverb that says, raise up a child in his way, and he will not depart from it, has to do not simply with the way of the abstract teaching of the Bible, of God, but a child's bent of what God has made him to be, of him discovering what it is, who he is, and what he loves to do. And so we try to get them in touch with what they really love to do and what they want to do.
So again, great material. Let me just one more time mention that we have a link to the website. It's gap.dentonbible.org, but you can simply find it there. Tommy Nelson, if somebody says, okay, I see what's on the website there, there's about an 18-minute video where they can watch you teach, but if they have other questions, they're free to call you or contact you and get a little bit more information, aren't they?
They can call, Drew Anderson in our church. He is a former middle linebacker from Midland Lee, all-state, undersized, over-aggressive, Texas A&M. If he was in the military, he'd have been a Marine lieutenant. And so Drew is just a great, great young man to take these guys. And they just need to give a call to Denton Bible, to the GAP program, and talk to Drew Anderson. And the program is not just an abstract of curriculum. It's the people that do it. And one of the best things that can happen to a young kid is to get underneath Drew Anderson and the people that he has here and the girl that we're going to bring in next year. And so they just need a phone call and to talk with them, and that kid's life will never be quite the same for the rest of his life.
Let me again mention that we have information about that, because one of our goals is not only for you to know about the program and maybe have a young person go to it, but I'm hoping a few of you pastors listening right now say, this is something we really need to do in our church as well. And if you wanted to spend some time with Tommy Nelson learning what they did and how they did it and wanting to develop it in your area of the country, I just think that would be excellent as well. So Tommy Nelson, as always, just great to have you on the program.
Can I give you one more thing, Kirby?
Please.
Our dream is that there will be all around America pastors and churches that see this as a blinding flash of the obvious, that we've got to take the next generation and get them ready. We've got to have Ezras and Esthers and Mordecais and Daniels and the like, and that it's an easy program to do, but it's not curriculum-oriented, it's person-oriented. And if they've got a Drew Anderson type that can just take young men that you can invest in and say, this is my staff guy, and he may not get more than about 6 guys because it's hands-on. I think that every single evangelical church in Western civilization needs a GAP program to take young women and get them ready for the world to come.
Again, that's our vision. That's why we did it today. Tommy Nelson, thank you for joining us. Looking forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you, Kerby.
We're going to take a break, and then, of course, tomorrow we will be getting back into some of the news and information. Of course, I gave you a little bit of a preview. Wednesday, John Stone Street with us. Thursday, Jim Dennison is with us. Friday, of course, we have Penedexter, Kelly Shackelford, and a number of other guests that you will enjoy as we talk about this. We'll also keep track of all the things happening in the news. There is more to cover than we possibly have time to do so. But if you find yourself needing some of this information, you can find it at the website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation here on Point of View, and we will see you back here tomorrow.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.